All right, welcome back everyone to the Deep Dive. We're diving into the AI Daily News Digest, today focusing on March 15th, 2025.
That's right. We've got summaries from all over the AI landscape. We've looked at Reddit, of course, X pulling data from 433 accounts there, and Discord, where we've got a good spread. 28 servers, 222 channels, 2,399 messages.
Quite a lot of information to sift through, but our mission, as always, is to find those nuggets, those core AI developments, and present them to you.
That's right.
Today we'll cover Google Gemini 2.0, Meta's DYT, Gemma 3, and Unsloth, see some ECSM 1B, QWQ 32B, and decentralized LLM deployment.
Sounds good.
Let's kick things off with Google's Gemini 2.0. What do we got?
Well, the deep research feature has been in the hands of users, and the initial feedback suggests there might be a bit of a weakness when it comes to context retention.
Well,
Yeah, even when you switch off the web search function, it seems like it might struggle a bit to remember what's been said earlier in a conversation.
so it's like how well it remembers the conversation flow without needing to go out and grab new information. Yeah.
Exactly. And, when you're thinking about using these models for complex tasks, like, say, brainstorming, or really digging into some analysis where each point builds on the last, well, that context retention becomes super important.
Absolutely. Makes sense.
And speaking of interesting integrations, there's buzz among NotebookLM users about pairing it up with Gemini 2.0 Deep Research.
Interesting. I could see how that would be a powerful combo.
Yeah.
I mean, for anyone who's not familiar, NotebookLM is Google's tool for working with documents and research, right? So
Yeah.
you'd essentially be giving it a huge boost in terms of finding and connecting information.
Right, exactly. And that's actually led to some speculation that maybe down the line, Deep Research might just absorb the core NotebookLM functionality. Kind of makes you wonder about Google's long-term strategy here.
Yeah, interesting to think about. Now let's switch gears a bit. What about image processing? Any news on Gemini 2.0 Flash experimental?
Yeah, so it looks like there might be some regional roadblocks. Some reports are pointing to potential restrictions in Germany, possibly even EU-wide, that seem to be impacting its image processing capabilities.
Hmm.
And actually, there's a report from a user in the US as well experiencing failures with image manipulation when using Gemini both in AI Studio and the Gemini app itself.
So it seems like it's not just a European issue then, potentially broader limitations or maybe some instability with those image processing features at this stage.
Yeah, could be. Definitely something to keep an eye on as more people get their hands on it. Now, moving on to Meta's DYT, we actually didn't come across any specific mentions of that in the digest we looked at.
Okay, so not a hot topic in those AI communities on those specific days, no problem. Let's shift our focus then to Gemma 3, specifically within the Unsloth framework. Lots of buzz around this one.
Tons. People are really excited about Unsloth's progress with fine-tuning. They're really pushing the boundaries with full fine-tuning. And there's real promise in the pipeline for 8-bit fine-tuning as well.
I think it's worth quickly reminding people what fine-tuning is all about. It's basically taking a pre-trained model and training it further on a specific data set to improve its performance on particular tasks, right?
Right, precisely. And Unsloth has really been gaining traction for making that process more efficient, more accessible.
And so what are they focused on at the moment?
Well, Daniel Hanshin from Unsloth AI, they've confirmed that their top priorities are 4-bit, 8-bit, and those full fine-tuning methods. Plus, they're even exploring the possibility of using Torque AO to enable Float 8 support.
Which would mean even more memory-efficient training and deployment, right?
You've got it. And that really speaks to a bigger theme we keep seeing, making these powerful models usable on a wider range of hardware.
Makes perfect sense.
And another thing fueling that is the community's desire for a more user-friendly web UI for running Unsloth locally. The idea is to simplify the process, make these advanced fine-tuning capabilities accessible to more people, even if they're not super tech-savvy.
I like it. Democratizing AI. So has people been successful in getting Gemma 3 up and running locally?
Oh, yeah. Full Deer 9001, that's our username, reported great results running Gemma 3 on a Radeon XTX with an 8K context length.
Wow, 8K.
Yeah, they even shared details about the VRAM usage, prompt stats, all that. Said it compared favorably to DeepSeek R1 in terms of performance.
That's impressive, especially on consumer-grade hardware.
For sure. And speaking of making things more accessible, there were discussions about optimizing the Gemma 3 12B model for systems with 16 MB of RAM.
Always a good thing.
Yeah.
And looks like the models are becoming readily available for people to tinker with.
Definitely. The Gemma 3 GGUF variants in sizes from 1B to 27B, along with the Gemma 3 dynamic 4-bit versions, have been uploaded to Hugging Face.
Perfect. Easy to download, easy to use. Now, with these models becoming more and more sophisticated, we've got to talk about multimodality.
Right. One user was curious about Gemma 3's ability to process images when used with Ollama, similar to 5Vision.
Interesting. And what was the verdict?
So while Gemma 3 GGUF models do have that vision processing component, it looks like it only works on all the major engines except for Ollama. Works with LM Studio and Llama.cpp, though.
Oh, so Allama's the odd one out here.
It seems so, yeah. Likely because the Llama server part of Ollama doesn't have built-in support for vision processing just yet.
Makes sense.
Oh, and another thing on Ollama, apparently the support for Gemma 3 GGUF models with vision is actually broken right now because of a wider issue impacting everyone uploading those models. So the temporary advice is to stick with the original text-based Gemma model if you're using Ollama.
Good to know, good to know.
Yeah.
Now, what about fine-tuning? Any chatter on that front?
Yeah, there were a few users who ran into an error during fine-tuning, specifically after adding new tokens and training new embeddings. Seems like it mostly popped up during the evaluation stage.
What kind of error are we talking about?
The message said something about only tensors of floating point D type can require gradients. Initial advice was to update to the latest unsloth version, but some folks said the problem was still there even after updating.
Sounds like a potential bug then. Hopefully developers are on it.
Fingers crossed. And then there was some back and forth about the VRAM Gemma needs during supervised fine-tuning. Some folks reckoned it might actually guzzle more VRAM than Qwen 2.5, even though Qwen's known for its efficient memory use.
That is an interesting point, especially for those with limited GPU resources. But what about raw performance? How do they stack up?
Well, one user said that Gemma 312B actually outperformed both Qwen 14B and 32B on their personal intelligence benchmark. And that included multilingual questions, too.
Impressive, if true. Always good to have those head-to-head comparisons. Now, before we move on, any updates on integrating Gemma 3 with other tools or platforms?
Yeah, quick note. The GPT-4All project needs an update to fully support Gemma 3. Apparently, there are some architectural tweaks compared to Gemma 2, specifically needing an mproj file.
Right, those little changes under the hood can sometimes trip things up.
Exactly. Now, this one's kind of fun. Someone asked Gemma 312B about what happens when water freezes, that whole expansion thing, and it correctly described the shattering effect on containers. DeepSeek R1, on the other hand, just said the jars would break. Didn't quite grasp the nuance there.
Shows you the difference in how these models understand, or maybe misunderstand, the real world.
Totally. Now, shifting gears a bit, there's been some talk about the Gemma 3 licensing. A TechCrunch article raised concerns, suggesting some of the terms might be a bit restrictive, inconsistent even, which could be tricky for commercial uses.
Licensing is definitely a big deal for anyone thinking about building products or services with these models.
For sure. It is worth noting, though, that all the Gemma 3 variations, the 1B, 4B, and the multimodal 12B, with 128K context and support for over 140 languages, are all free to use.
So that's a plus. Free access is huge for the AI community.
Definitely. Last thing on Gemma 3, there's a pull request underway to get it working with Liger kernel. The developers pointed out a lot of similarities between Gemma 3 and 2, with some differences in the RMS norm calls. Suggests ongoing optimization efforts.
Always good to see. All right, moving on. Let's talk about Sesame ECSM 1B. Seems like this one's gotten a mixed reception, to say the least.
Yeah, you could say that. So Sesame ECSM 1B, brand new voice cloning model. Initial discussions focused on licensing, with Sesame being Apache licensed, which means commercial use is a go.
Okay, so more flexible than, say, the F5 model, which uses a Creative Commons non-commercial license.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Users were quick to point out some major performance issues. We're talking slow processing times, some folks reporting up to 50 seconds to clone just a paragraph of speech on a GPU.
Wow. That's not exactly ideal for real-time applications.
Not at all. There were also whispers that it might not be playing nice with Windows, maybe better optimized for Linux.
Interesting. But the community usually finds workarounds, right?
Oh yeah, always resourceful. Some shared steps they tried on Windows, upgrading to PyTorch 2.6 and other packages, workarounds to skip the Hugging Face account requirement, that kind of thing. Someone even shared the API endpoint for the voice cloning.
So resourceful, as always.
Always. But here's the kicker. The real controversy, the real disappointment, was around the marketing.
Oh.
Many felt that Sesame had sort of, misrepresented the model. They presented it as a CSM, a conversational speech model, but what they released, the 1B model, was pretty much universally recognized as just a TTS, a text-to-speech engine.
Big difference in functionality and expectations there.
Huge, especially because there was a lot of anticipation for an open source release based on, earlier hype and comms.
And that open source aspect is something the community really values, that transparency.
Absolutely. And, this led to some discussion about the marketing tactics of VC-backed companies, Sesame being backed by A16s and all.
Right.
But ultimately, the general feeling was that the 1B model just wasn't that impressive performance-wise, especially for real-time stuff.
Didn't quite live up to the hype then.
Pretty much. There was some technical discussion, too, about the Mimi tokenizer and the model architecture maybe contributing to the slow speeds. Some suggested using CADA graphs or looking at different models like XLMA v2 for potential optimizations.
So, room for improvement then? But what else were folks unhappy about?
The release was also missing some key components you'd need for a complete conversational system. Like there was no LLM for conversation understanding, no STT for speech-to-text, and no VAD for voice activity detection.
So essentially, they released one piece of the puzzle, expecting users to figure out the rest.
Basically. And even though they put out a curated list of use cases built with this so-called CSM on Hugging Face, the overall sentiment remained pretty negative.
Marketing misstep, perhaps.
Seems that way. Oh, and just for context, someone mentioned Moshi by Qtai Labs and HertzDev by Standard Intelligence as potentially more in line with what people were hoping for from Sesame.
Right, so other developments in the audio world that might be closer to a true conversational model. Makes sense. All right, let's move on. What about QWQ32B? Seems to have generated some excitement, especially around benchmark performance.
Yeah, QWQ32B from Alibaba reportedly scored 71.96 on LiveBench, beating DeepSeek R1, which scored 71.57. And apparently it consistently outperformed R1 across subcategories like reasoning, coding, mathematics, data analysis, language, and IF average.
That's a pretty big deal, especially when you're talking about a well-respected model like DeepSeek R1. But were people skeptical?
Oh, for sure. Some pointed out Alibaba's history of optimizing for benchmarks, questioning how well it would perform in the real world compared to R1. There were doubts about its stability and general knowledge, too.
That age-old debate, benchmark performance versus real-world utility.
Yep. The coding performance was a hot topic. Some struggled to believe it could come close to Claude 3.7, especially since LiveBench mostly focuses on Python and JavaScript, while Aider tests over 30 languages.
Right. Always good to look at a variety of benchmarks and real-world tests.
Exactly. But hey, despite the reservations, there's a lot of hype for a potential QWQ Max, a larger version that could potentially surpass R1 in size and performance.
So maybe this is just a taste of what's to come.
Maybe. Oh, and there was an update to QWQ32B on LiveBench. Fresh performance metrics for anyone who's following along closely.
Constant iteration and improvement. That's the name of the game.
Absolutely. On the practical side, QWQ32B got props for its local coding abilities. Some even said it beats larger models like R1 for certain local tasks. There were discussions about tweaking settings like the logit bias for the ending tag to adjust the model's thinking time, and folks were experimenting with updates to fix those annoying infinite loops.
Always good to have more control.
For sure. And there's a growing sense that smaller, efficient models like QWQ32B might be the future for local applications, as opposed to relying on those massive flagship models. Some folks were so impressed with QWQ's creativity and benchmarks that they're thinking about dropping their OpenAI subscriptions.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. This actually sparked a conversation about open sourcing models in general. Some suggested that China's approach of releasing models openly could be accelerating AI development compared to, the US focus on corporate profit and proprietary tech.
Interesting geopolitical angle.
Definitely. There were some bug fixes implemented for QWQ32B, making it more stable and boosting performance, and multiple variants were uploaded to Hugging Face for everyone to play with. Plus, the evaluation scripts used to test QWQ were made public on GitHub, which is great for transparency and reproducibility.
Absolutely crucial for moving the field forward. But were there any quirks or downsides to QWQ?
Well, funnily enough, some people noticed that QWQ tends to doubt itself a lot during its thinking process. They said it kind of leads to inefficient token usage and slower response times, like it's constantly fact-checking itself.
So even AI can be a bit neurotic, huh?
Apparently. It even sparked a meme or two online.
Got all the internet humor. All right, last but not least, decentralized LLM deployment. What did the digest reveal on this front?
Well, we didn't see any big pronouncements or dedicated threads titled decentralized LLM deployment or anything, but, you
Hmm.
know, all those discussions about running models locally using things like LM Studio and Olama, the whole open source movement with models like Gemma 3 and QWQ Thermal 2B, the focus on accessibility and community involvement, they all point to a bigger picture.
Right, it's more of an underlying current than a breaking news story.
Exactly. It's about empowering people to use LLMs in a more distributed way, less reliance on centralized cloud services.
Democratization of AI, in a sense.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive into the AI Daily News Digest from March 15th, 2025 has certainly been a whirlwind. New models, performance updates, community debates, all in a single day's worth of data. It really highlights the dynamic nature of this field.
For sure. The developments with Gemma 3, the contrasting reception of CSMN ECSM1B, the impressive benchmarks from QWQ32B, it all paints a vivid picture of the diverse approaches and the rapid innovation happening right now.
And, it forces us to think about the bigger picture, the implications of this open source push, the increasing accessibility of powerful AI tools. It's a fascinating time to be following this space.
It absolutely is. And with that in mind, here's something for you to ponder. What stood out to you as the most significant development from this digest, and what questions does it raise for you about the future of AI?
A lot to think about for sure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll be back soon with another exploration into the latest AI news.